The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get stinko.
Welcome to a special edition of Giles and the Goalie podcast. I am Giles Farrell. Find me on Twitter at Giles Farrell. Across the continent from me is Ben Remington.
Hello.
You can find him on Twitter at Ben Remington. And producing our fine show today is the master himself, Tom Schreier.
I'm here. Deliver hot takes.
He is here. Fairness and disclosure, the podcast might go on hiatus for a few weeks as we're all about to be called up to the Minnesota Wild as injury replacements.
I got to figure I can get a backup. I can get an emergency goalie gig at worst, right?
I mean, you are in Phoenix, so they probably could use a goaltender with any kind of experience down there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually probably going to the game on Thursday. So.
Ooh, nice.
Who do they play?
They play the Stars.
Ooh. Do you want me to
some advanced scouting?
Do you want me to send you a Sagan jersey to wear?
No, I thought about bringing some North Star stuff, but then people would think that I'm a Stars fan because they stole our name and all that stuff. So, yeah. But no, I'm gonna rock the 1507 T-shirt instead.
There you go. Buy a Robo Coyote jersey.
I will buy a jersey if it's there for sure.
So what we have for you today is we have a special guest, as we alluded to on Sunday, and we have Craig Custance of The Athletic. He's going to jump on with us. We're going to talk a little bit about the start of the season, the Wild, Craig's book, and then we're going to get to our favorite two questions we ask every guest. But so we're excited to jump in with Craig. But since we are doing a special show, we might as well talk a little bit Wild for a minute or two, as why not? We can do what we want. But Ben, your thoughts on Darby Hendrickson coming out of retirement for the Minnesota Wild this week?
I think there's feel good stories, and then there's don't bother stories, and that's maybe more along the lines of a don't bother story.
Paul's and Hendrickson.
So
jumping in a line.
You don't want to see a break from the Ennis Spurgeon best friend stories to hear about Darby Hendrickson?
I think, and certainly at Fake Don Lucia will probably endorse this, but let's just call up Mario Lucia and get that homegrown feel good Gopher story to kind of distract us from what we might be dealing with right now, rather than the corpse of Darby Hendrickson playing hockey.
And yesterday, on Monday, Zach Parise left practice early as he had another setback in his return to recovery. And basically, I'm at the point with this where he just needs to be put on LTIR and try again down the line. But I don't know where you're at.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't know if they can retroactive this because he practiced. I would think they can because he obviously hasn't appeared in a game since last, April. So, LTIR him for sure. I mean, it doesn't. It's not like they need the cap space that badly now because they were able to do it with Coyle. But you just don't know how long this injury is going to go on. I mean, if he's having setbacks, basically his first week back to practice. Then how long is it going to take before they have any confidence in him playing any kind of meaningful game time?
They also, in all seriousness, just need to open up to the young players, right? And kind of go, what do you have? Because that's going to determine probably moves they make down the road.
All right.
Let alone it's what's best for your player development.
And I mean, you put him on LTIR now, and you get cap space, and it'll come in handy at the trade deadline, even if Parise does come back. But that's just my opinion. The Wild seem to be taking a page out of the Terry Ryan playbook, where you sit around on a player for a while in the hopes that he comes back from injury, and then nope, got to put him on IR.
Yeah.
That after 10 days had passed, so it was like you're wasting a spot.
Yeah, and maybe I don't know. Maybe they can use, if they LTIR Parise, you certainly don't want to have them wasting a lot of assets, but maybe it's a decent time to look at making a trade for kind of a temporary solution kind of thing. I don't know. There's this guy in Buffalo who's off to a pretty good start you could trade for.
Whoa.
Just spitballing here.
Jack Eichel, yep. They should trade for him.
That's logical.
If only they had signed some guy at the beginning of the year whose last name rhymes with blogger.
What's funny is that in my Yager article this summer, I painted this exact scenario. I said the only way the Wild can sign Yager is if they LTIR Parise, and they were just 2 weeks late on the boat. That's they could have just done it right off the bat and they would have been fine.
Peak Wild right there.
Also, the perfect guy right now where you have young players who he can mentor, right? Who are going to have a bigger role because they're forced to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna jump right into it here with Craig, and as we said, we had some good topics to hit on, so we'll let you listen to that. All right, joining us on the podcast today from the Athletic and the Detroit side of the Athletic is Craig Custance. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we dive into it, how is the new confines at Little Caesars Arena? Because I know the Joe Louis Arena press box was quite spacious. So how's the new digs treating you?
Yeah, quite spacious. I got to say, it's taken a couple games for me to get used to not getting pushed in the back every time somebody walks by me in the press box in Detroit, or shoved in the back of the head, or I could never tell if it was because I wrote something that people were mad about, or it was just because it was such tight quarters up there. But it's nice. It's huge. And what I like when you take I tweeted out a picture yesterday. People are like, "Boy, you guys are high up," which we are. But the sight line, the pitch, is really steep. So you just feel like you're looking right down on top of the ice, which I like.
I was going to mention. Did you go there last year? Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I went there last year as well. I was one of the Ducks games, ironically. Giles here is wearing a Ducks jersey. But what are the pros and cons? Because the Joe was cool. It was a cool experience and understand the history. But I got to imagine this one, for all practical purposes, is way better.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely lose atmosphere. And, I don't want to, jump to any conclusions 2 games into the life of an arena, because I don't think you gain that atmosphere until you start playing meaningful games and you have moments that people connect with the arena. But it's been interesting because I noticed in opening night there's been a lot of empty seats, and I don't know if that's you tended to give the benefit of the doubt that there's so much to look at in this arena, and the concourses, and there's really cool bars to hang out at, that fans just aren't in their seats the whole game, and I'll be curious to see how that plays out, because it doesn't make for a great, moment when half the rink is empty. So that's been an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
Since we have Craig joining us today, I know the season is still kind of young, but since we're kind of a Minnesota Wild themed podcast, do you have any thoughts here on the Wild early on? Have you been able to kind of get a view of them outside of that first game against the Red Wings?
Yeah, that was really, obviously still writing about the league, but I've been more Detroit-centric since running the Detroit portion of the Athletic. And so, yeah, my early impressions of Minnesota are kind of, in terms of watching them live and seeing them, is in that game. I'm just curious to see, that's a team that they overachieved last year. And when you look at the Central, and some of the teams that have gotten better in the Central, we all sit there and go, the Dallas Stars are going to make the playoffs. We love that team. We love what Jim Mill did. The Winnipeg Jets are are kind of on the upswing. That's probably a team that's going to push. But then you're like, oh, but you have to start removing teams from the playoffs if you're going to just plug teams in. And I think, a team like St. Louis is off to a good start. They were kind of my bubble team. And I think Minnesota, it's so tight. I think they're a team that's going to have to kind of scratch and claw to get in.
And it's so weird, at least for as long as I can remember, at least in the Western Conference, it always feels like getting off to a good start is just so crucial because it's always just so many
it's
teams
compact.
are
There's
in
so
the
many
mix.
good teams.
And
Yeah.
if you don't get off to a good start, you're chasing the 8-ball, and unless you go on an incredible run like the Wild did a couple years ago, you're really never going to be able to recover.
Well, and then don't we always have to count on the Wild having like that stretch in whenever it is January where they don't win a game forever? Like, you got to factor that into the equation too.
Yeah, the annual swoon.
We name them here. We name them.
Yeah,
we
I just wrote
recently
an article
started
about it last
naming
week,
them.
Craig,
That's how frequent they are. They have to be named now.
So, I mean, like hurricanes, like each one has its own name. It's like, oh, remember that one? Yeah. Oh man.
And I guess it's the hockey season in general. Craig, do you have any kind of thoughts? I mean, obviously everyone's been talking about like the Golden Knights, and you mentioned like St. Louis off to a good start. Do you have any kind of other just kind of general thoughts on the league here early on?
Well, maybe because it's fresh in my mind. I just filed a story for The Athletic on Nikita Kucherov, who has 7 goals in 6 games. I think he's been, I think what we're seeing is a continuation of his play from down the stretch last year, but I don't think anybody really noticed his play down the stretch, or at least at a national level, because they were outside the playoff hunt, and there was Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews, and there was a lot of things to get excited about. This kid's been absolutely dominant. It's funny though. So he scores 6 goals in 6 games. I just tweeted this out. He joining 4 guys: Lemieux, Steve Yzerman, Keith Tkachuk, and I think since 87, 88 to have 6 goals in 6 games. So I called Keith Tkachuk this morning and I said, hey, what's it like to do that? What does it mean to your season? And he's like, I didn't know why you were calling. He has no recollection of doing that. He's like, he goes, the further away you get from playing, the more you forget about those things. And I'm like, wasn't that long ago? So, it's been neat to see Kucherov kind of ascend to that star level, to the point where I think if you ask people, who's the engine on that team, him or Steven Stamkos, I think it's Kucherov at this point.
Well,
so because we have Craig on with us today, Craig is actually promoting a book right now, which was just released here within the last month, called Behind the Bench. Craig, do you kind of want to give a little more into the book?
Yeah. So the concept of this book is that I had the idea that I would love to sit down with coaches and watch some game film and break down some X's and O's, and I'm like, boy, what's a good way to get at that? And I ran the idea by Mike Babcock. This is going back a couple years now because he was still in Detroit. And I said, I kind of sketched it. I said, look, I would like to sit down. Would you be up for it if we would maybe watch the Canadian Olympic gold in 2010? And Mike was really good. He goes, come back at me when you have a formulated plan. He's like, but this has to be more than just kind of an X's and O's book if you're going to do it well. We have to get into some leadership theory and if you really, let's do this. If you're going to do it right. And he was right. Like I kind of it was a half-baked idea, and circled back and approached the publisher and just said, hey, if I can get these 10 coaches to sit down and watch a game, and we can get into the path they took to become a coach, the leadership theories they have, the great moments in those games, the strategies, would there be interest? And I was excited to sell it, and had 10 coaches buy in: Joel Quenneville and Claude Julien and Mike Babcock and Dan Bowles and Mike Sullivan. I mean, just anybody who's won pretty much in the last decade or so agreed to do it. And the stories that they told in this book are pretty incredible.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, you got some pretty high profile coaches in here. I know. You worked pretty close with Mike Babcock during his time in Detroit, but that's definitely quite a list of coaches you got there.
Yeah, and it was neat because there's some guys I knew pretty well. Like I knew Mike from the time in Detroit. Todd McClellan through the years. We sat down and watched. He won a world championship with Canada with Sidney Crosby entering the triple gold club. That was a neat watch. So I've known Todd pretty well, but there were some coaches who I just didn't know, and to me the most interesting was John Tortorella. I only knew him through the context of press conferences and scrums. And as you guys know, and watching some of those, they don't always go well for people on my side of the equation. To the point where it's like, man, you better know what you're asking and come correct with a good question, or else you're going to get. One of the things about John I learned through the years, and you kind of learn the hard way, like he doesn't ever talk about the other team or players in the other team, and so that was my thought about John was, as a national writer at ESPN and before that Sporting News, it was a lot of times I'm working on kind of in-depth profiles of players, and you like to dive in and get opposing coaches' point of views. And I'd made the mistake a couple of times of asking John those questions, and he had zero time for it. So that was my kind of point of entry with John Tortorella, and he was so good and so cooperative. He actually pitched it. He said, "Well, what if we do me and Mike Sullivan together in a room? I'm going to be in St. Paul preparing for the World Cup, and they're best friends." And I'm like, oh my gosh, what a great idea. And that chapter ends up being both of them. We watched games back to back. Penguins winning a cup, Tortorella's Lightning winning a cup. And getting him in that setting where it was, a July day or August, whatever it was, completely relaxed and comfortable. It was a side of him I'd never seen. And what he was really interesting about was diving into how to maximize getting the most out of your players. And he believes you have to create conflict to do it, to really get people out of their comfort zone, to really to get them to exceed even kind of their internal expectations. And I think, as you guys have seen through the years, it creates some issues kind of within the dynamic of the team. There may be some battles, but at the end of the day, the people that kind of come out of it on the other end end up being a pretty good team usually for John Tortorella. And they, in the case of the Lightning, a lot of those guys ended up following him to New York, and Brad Richards and Ruslan Fedotenko and Dan Boyle. And you mentioned Vinny Lecavalier, who kind of famously battled with, wanted to go to New York. And so it was really neat to have kind of the time to dig into some of those things with all these coaches.
I guess one last question here on the book. Is there maybe like a story you had, like kind of behind the scenes while doing the book that really like you remember from, the work putting into it that maybe didn't get in the book, Mike Babcock showing you, a hockey stick from like the 70s or just anything like that?
Anything really good I put in the book. And if I didn't put in the book, I didn't because I thought the coaches would get mad about it. So I probably wouldn't want me sharing it on a podcast. But there were some moments where, because a lot of these games I was at just covering, so whether it was the Olympic Games or, Stanley, Claude Julien doing the Game 7 against Vancouver, one of my favorite series in my life ever to cover. And so it was fun to relive it that way. But there was another game I was at in sitting down with Joe Quenneville and watching the Blackhawks beat the Flyers in Game 6, and that goal that Patrick Kane, he's the only one who knew who scored, and that the really bad goal the Flyers gave up. And what I found fascinating with Joe Quenneville, at one point he says, we're sitting there, we're watching it in his office in Chicago, and he says, hey, fast forward to the part where Johnny gets hurt. I'm talking about Jonathan Toews. And I'm like, no, he doesn't get hurt in this game. There was no, reports of him getting hurt. We had no idea he got hurt in this game. He goes, oh, yeah, he really hurt his knee bad. He's like, oh, maybe that never came out. And so we start fast forward, we start kind of cherry picking through the video, trying to find a moment, and we find it where the Flyers score a goal, somebody kind of rolls on his knee, and he says, watch. He goes, so the rest of the game, and I didn't realize this, Joe Quenneville is trying to get him on the ice just basically as a decoy so the Flyers don't realize he's hurt. And he misses a couple shifts, but he kind of gets him back out there, and you can tell he's laboring. And Joe Quenneville's like, we had no idea if this was going Game 7, if Jonathan Toews was going to play at all. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Wow. And I'm thinking, but how does history change if somehow the Flyers score in overtime and it goes back to Chicago without Jonathan Toews? And those are the moments you realize just how perilously close a lot of these guys came to not having that moment with their team.
Wow. So Craig, I guess where can people find your book if they definitely want to get that?
Anywhere. It's in all bookstores, Barnes & Noble. It's published by Triumph out of Chicago, so if you go to triumphbooks.com, you can get it there, or, it's probably easiest just to go to Amazon and get it there. And the one plug I'll say, aside from, buying it, if you do read it and like it, especially leaving a review on Amazon really helps the writer out a lot. It goes a long way just in terms of getting the word out and, moving it up the rankings and all that. So if you liked it, review it. If you hated it, then by all means, just ignore this
Yeah, no, I'll definitely do that. I got a copy here in front of me.
Awesome.
And I know we're a little crunch for time here, but I got 2 quick questions for you. We have to ask this to all our guests because Ben and I we go back and forth on these questions. The first of which is because we're such big hockey jersey fans. Do you have a particular favorite from all time, or if you can't narrow it down like us, give you like a Mount Rushmore of jerseys?
Here's what I'll say: my hockey jersey. I'm not a big I don't collect jerseys. I'm not a jersey guy. But I will say I have one regret in my entire life. Is in not getting a jersey. It was when I was covering the Atlanta Thrashers, and it gets better. They had, I don't know if you guys remember, they had signed or they had traded or signed for Chris Chelios at the very end of his career for 10 games. And within that tiny window, they randomly did a St. Patrick's Day Atlanta Thrashers, warm-up jersey night, where Chris Chelios, that they auctioned off in a silent auction, that you probably could have gotten it for nothing. And I remember thinking, when else in my entire life am I ever going to be able to buy a green Thrashers Chris Chelios jersey than in this moment? And I pondered it in the press box. I'm like, I don't know. Is that, would it be unprofessional if I signed up and did the silent auction? So I opted against it, and I completely regret that, not having that awesome Irish piece of history.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to try and Google that one.
Good luck. If somebody has that, I will buy it off.
Giles just made a purchase.
And then the last question. This is a little bit off the board, but Ben and I argue this more than any 2 human beings ever should. But do you consider soup to be a meal?
Is soup a meal? I want to hear the argument against, because I don't think this is a debate. How is soup not a meal?
Ben?
It's you got, especially if you have bread with it. I'm picturing potatoes and carrots, and you got a big, or a wedding, a minestrone. That's a meal. That's everything you would put together. It just happens to be liquid.
I think soup has its culinary place, but I feel like it's more of an appetizer. I feel like it's a good side dish.
I mean, I guess it's how much is in the bowl. I guess it's an appetizer if it's a tiny cup, but you can certainly get a big old bowl of soup and a hunk of bread and some butter, and that is absolutely a meal. I would defend that to my death.
There you go. All right, Craig, thank you so much for jumping on with us. Where can people find you?
Oh, everywhere. Probably overexposed at this point. It's just, I would just say, read the book. If you're not subscribing to The Athletic, do that. Especially if you're a Minnesota fan. Mike Russo is an animal. Yeah. He's the best there is at what he does. I think if you're a hockey fan, what we're doing at The Athletic is worth whatever it is, $5 a month. And also for podcast fans, I'm about to launch the 3rd episode of the Full 60, and actually Mike Russo was our guest last week, where we spent an hour talking hockey with people in the game, and Mike was fascinating. It was great to kind of get his path from a kid delivering, from a paper boy and to becoming, a prominent sports writer, and is as good as anybody in the country. And it was fun to kind of go down that path with him. So I would hop on iTunes and get the Full 60, and Twitter and wherever else. I
bet when you had Mike on, you had no idea when you asked him one question how long he could just go with that said question.
Only, especially when you're talking about Mike Russo. That was Mike on Mike is gold.
All right, Craig, thank you again so much for joining us today, and we'll catch you again sometime.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks very much, Craig.
All right, that was really fun. As I said, I really enjoyed Craig's stance on soup.
Of course
important.
You did.
Yeah, it is important, and
yeah.
And Ben and I are frantically trying to find this Chris Chelios jersey for Craig to buy. But,
Yeah, I really, I didn't know a whole lot about his book. I knew it was about coaching, but now looking at it, it's really kind of a fascinating topic, and I probably would like to get around to reading that at some point. I'm always kind of interested because us, in the quote unquote the media, us media jackals, we like to come to conclusions. We like to make assumptions on what coaches should and shouldn't do, and what coaches are thinking in certain spots. But really, you have no idea. You really genuinely have no idea unless you talk to a coach. And then maybe you can second guess. But for the most part, I mean, the wisdom of a guy who's been through the NHL and the list of coaches he's got is just incredible. So the wisdom of those guys, just to kind of see what they think and what they're seeing and what they're thinking during those crucial games, those huge games that he watched, is really kind of, I got to think, invaluable wisdom.
when he was early on, when he was talking about the book, he was talking about how it'd be fascinating to sit down with coaches and talk X's and O's for a little bit. And then in my head, when I was just going, man, it would be great to just sit with Bruce Boudreau and for a half hour to BS about hockey, because he always has a good line, as we reference him every week. Yeah. So
do you guys feel like there's coaches that are head and shoulders above other ones intelligence level, or do you think it's more kind of their ability to manage a locker room and other qualities beyond just the X's and O's of hockey?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think you've got some coaches who are super intelligent and approach it with a very cerebral approach. And then you've got guys who just know how to motivate people. Like you mentioned with Torts. I don't know that Torts is of genius level intellect. But
probably not.
But he clearly knows how to motivate people. You know what I mean? And Bruce Boudreau. Bruce Boudreau will probably tell you he's not the brightest bulb in the tree, but he obviously understands, what it takes to get the most out of his players. And it's not even an insult to his intelligence. I don't think any hockey coaches are particularly dumb guys. I think they're all at least, average or above average intelligence. But I think there are guys that are super intelligent, but there are guys that aren't and just go about it a different way and still have success.
Well, I think the biggest one is one of the two he has on the cover of his book, which is Mike Babcock, and he kind of talked about him at great length because he had been working with him for so long. But yeah, no, I agree. I think there's some coaches who clearly know how to just motivate players and might not be the brightest at the X's and O's, and then you have kind of opposites, and then you got those who are good at both, and those are probably some of your better head coaches in the league.
Who was the Lightning coach who was supposed to be like a genius, and the Flyers figured out his method? Like
Barry Melrose.
No, it was not Barry Melrose. It was Guy.
Guy Boucher.
Was it Guy Boucher?
Now Senators head coach.
Is that right? And he had some system that was unique, and the Flyers just figured it out. Yeah.
Well, the Flyers just stood there and waited for the Lightning to move.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Ottawa's experiencing the same issues because they went far in the playoffs last year because of that kind of dull system, but obviously it didn't last.
Went far in the playoffs because Erik Karlsson took them there.
Well, there's that too. Yeah.
Let's not give too much credit to that system. I still can't believe they were in double overtime of Game 7 of the Eastern Finals. That's just
yeah.
But that was fun. I still can't believe I was chatting with Craig Custance. I know that seems like stupid, but I don't know. I've been following Craig for quite a while now.
He said the same thing about you. He's saying it right now.
Don't you hate pants?
I can imagine.
I didn't know until I looked it up. He's 6 months younger than me.
This is what I told Giles when I walked in.
Makes me feel like the most worthless pile of human trash. But because he's been a national hockey writer for what, damn near a decade now, it feels like, or at least 5 years solid.
Well, he started with the Thrashers, and
right,
as he mentioned, and then he kind of moved on up, and then
what am I doing with my life?
I mean, you're in Phoenix, so it can't be that bad.
Yeah. Well, yeah. At least the weather's okay.
True.
There's that.
It's actually supposed to be like 70 degrees here today.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not bad.
So it's weird, and the weather's throwing me off. But Because it still doesn't feel like it should be hockey season. So we have this
True.
this heat, and then we have 5-day layoffs where the Wild don't play, and then I just forget that the Wild have started.
I think the Wild forgot they started too.
Well, the Wild
No
are
kidding.
hoping they hadn't started because they're going
they'd
to
be
have
healthier.
a roster of 13 players tomorrow night.
I bet their training staff knows the season started.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that can wrap it up for us. Again, thank you to Craig for jumping on with us today. It was a blast. Ben and I will be back on our regular show next Sunday. And if you haven't, check out our most recent episode where we go nuts about Yager. I'm just kidding.
No, you have a very important breakfast pizza take.
Yes,
That's the selling point.
That's what people need to hear is my breakfast pizza story.
It's like just the most meandering story.
I was actually really proud of the Clark Griswold reference. I may have patted myself on the back for that one.
Oh, God damn.
No, so thanks to Tom for producing this otherwise fine podcast. You can find Tom on Twitter at tschreier3. He covers a lot of Minnesota sports, not just the Wild.
Yeah.
Again, find Ben and I on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell. Find our podcast on Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. You can find us on other social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, same handle. Download this show on Libsyn, iTunes, give us an iTunes rating, Stitcher, and find our written works at zonecoverage.com. So yeah, thank you for checking us out here today, and we will catch you next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.